Hey grade 7, and welcome to another exciting edition of Mr. V Teaches Math. And today what we're going to be doing is solving percent problems using equivalent fractions and decimals. We're going to be finding the percent of a number. So, we're going to be finding out what 25% of 120 is, or we're going to be finding out what 32% of 83 is, or something along those lines. And I'm going to show you some ways to do that, okay? So to get into that, let's consider this problem. This is kind of a neat one. Baseball players, they get elected to some baseball players anyway, get elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame. That's the BHOF. And it's in Cooperstown, New York. And they get voted in by the Baseball Writers Association. Now, to be elected, a player must receive 75% of the vote that's carried out by the writers. And in 1991, so it's a long time ago, a former player named Ferguson Jenkins, who was actually from Chatham, Ontario, he was up for nomination, and he received 334 out of 443 votes from the writers. So then the main question that we're going to be considering is, did he actually receive 75% of the votes required? So in order to solve that, we need to do a few things. First of all, we need to consider 75% as a decimal. And remember from yesterday, we talked about converting percents to decimals, and all we have to do is take that number and divide it by 100, so we get 0.75. Okay, the next thing, so we're looking to figure out what 75% of 443 is, and we're going to find out. So we've now converted this number to a decimal. The next thing that we need to consider is the word of. When we see of in a math sentence like this, we know from a couple of units ago that it just means times. So we are going to multiply 0.75 times 443. And then when we see the word is, it means equals. And then our question mark, that's what's our unknown. Okay? So when we get out our calculator and we take 443 and times it by 0.75, you actually need 332, roughly, 332.25 votes. That's technically exactly what 75% of 443 is. Now, Ferguson Jenkins, as I said a few minutes ago, received 334 votes. So the other way that we can look at this, he has 334 out of 443 votes. We can convert that. We do 334 divided by 443 times 100, which actually equals 75.4%, rounded to one decimal place. So he did indeed receive the amount of votes that he needed. Okay? So that's the first way to calculate the percent of a number. Okay? You convert the percent to a decimal, you convert the word of to a times sign, the word is becomes an equal sign, and then you can solve it. That's why it's important to know the difference between, or know how to convert between fractions, decimals, and percents. So let's go through a couple more problems together, because being able to convert the percent of a number is a pretty important skill in this unit, because we're going to go on and talk about, as I said a few lessons ago, interest on savings accounts. We're going to be able to calculate commission on selling things, all kinds of stuff. So you really need to be able to do that. So, first example here, it says the Lee's restaurant bill was $45. They left a 15% tip. And then how much did they leave? When you go to a restaurant, obviously I'm certain every one of you have been to restaurants before. It's customary for you to leave a tip for your server after the bill has come to thank them for good service. When I was a kid, it was 10%. It has since gone up to 15%. And I'm even hearing these days that 20% is more and more customary. But we're going to go with a 15% tip. So what you do is you take your total, which is $45, and you want to find out what 15% of $45 is. So again, we convert 15% to a decimal, 0.15. The of becomes a times. And then this number can stay the same. And then we change the word is to equals. we can get out our calculator and do decimal 15 times 45, which means that the tip should be $6.75. If you're going to tip exactly 15%, that's how much the tip should be, $6.75. The next example that we're going to go through is this one. And it says, on average, Canadian teenagers watch television 11% of the time. So then how many hours does the average teenager watch television? So we need to figure out, first of all, how many hours there are in a year. Okay? So we're going to assume that an average year has 365 days. And each day has 24 hours. So we can take those two numbers and multiply them. Okay, so we do 365 times 24, which gives us 8,760 hours in a year. And then what we do with that is we want to find out what 11% of 8,760 is. Again, the process, convert to a decimal. 11% is 0.11, 0.11. Of becomes times. This number stays the same. And when you do decimal 11 times 8,760, you get a total of 963.6 hours in a year. 963.6 hours in a year. That's a lot. That's a lot of television. Okay? The last example that we're going to look at is this one. It's a little bit more tricky. And what it says is that there are 10 boys in Aaron's music class. Now, if 40% of the students in the music class are boys, how many students are there in the class? Now, I'm going to set this up a little bit differently. I'm going to set this up in a proportion where I'm going to have the number of boys in a class, in the music class, over the number of students in the class. I have the percent who are boys, and then I'm going to have over 100. Now, this one's interesting because, because of how we can set it up. So we know that the number of boys in the class is 10. We don't actually know how many students there are in total, but we know that that is 40 because the number of boys is 40%, and we know that the total is 100%. So basically, what we're trying to do is, if you look at it one way, to get to 40 from 10, you have to multiply 10 times 4, which if you look in reverse, if the arrow goes this way, to get from 40 to 10, you have to divide it by 4. That's kind of like a reverse scale factor. Okay? And the same way over here, if we look at it in reverse, it's the same bit of division. Okay? So 100 divided by 4 means that x equals 25. That means that the number of students in Aaron's music class is 25. Okay? And you can double check that. If you say that 10 out of 25 people, if you want to calculate that and make sure that it actually is 40, you can do 10 divided by 25 times 100 does in fact equal 40%. So we've done that correctly. Okay, so that's a little bit of a different way to calculate that problem. And it's a bit of a different take on that. You know, the percent of a number is this. But in this case, we know that it's like this. 40% of some number is 10. So we're trying to figure out what that number is. Now, your job is to be able to figure out where to put these numbers. If you're setting it up in a proportion, where some fraction equals some other fraction that's in proportion, you got to figure out where the numbers go. Okay? So the 40% that goes here, we know that this is 100. Now this is saying that 40% is 10, which means that it's got to go on this line. Okay? That's why it's important. So you're trying to figure out what that number is. Okay? That's a bit of a hard skill to get, but I think you guys can do it. And we'll get to practice it tomorrow.